folks who are powering and heating their homes with electricity, you're going to see a bit of a spike when it comes to demand. And that's just because demand for electricity is rising across the board. And so for folks who are heating their homes primarily with electricity, it's going to be about 4% increase in bills.
Welcome to Deep Dive. This week, we're examining the surge in electricity prices that's hitting households across the country, especially as winter approaches. These costs played a pivotal role in Democrats' strong showing in the 2025 gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, where affordability topped voters' minds. Joining us is Callie Patteson, the reporter who covered this story for the Washington Examiner. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Callie.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So let's start with the big picture. Your reporting highlights how energy costs were a key driver in the Virginia and New Jersey governor races, with Democrats like Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill winning by promising to tackle, utility bills. And exit polls showed 87% of New Jersey voters viewing electricity prices as a problem. Can you walk us through how you sourced those polls and what surprised you the most about voters' frustration?
Yeah, of course. The best thing about these elections, whether it's the midterms and off year, is that a lot of these outlets like CNN, ABC, they're all posted outside these polls. And so they're talking to voters as they're coming out. And so that's kind of a great resource for us when we're trying to figure out how voters are feeling after they have submitted their ballot. And so we got to see really how many voters were thinking about electricity prices leading up to these elections. It doesn't come as a huge surprise. We've been hearing a lot more candidates like Spanberger and Sherrill really highlighting this in their campaigns, making it a key point to say, when I am governor, we are going to solve this issue. We're going to lower rates, or at least we're going to slow the rate increases as best we can. And for a long time, especially in Virginia, we've been hearing that energy and electricity prices were more of a sleeper issue. And so in the past couple of weeks, there's actually been a lot of state officials that were surprised at how much prominence it had in these elections, especially in Virginia. Of course, we have the government shutdown going on, and we have other issues that are definitely driving the votes as well. But it's clear, like we saw in New Jersey, 87%, as you mentioned, electricity prices are a problem for voters. They're seeing their rates hike. They're worried about their rates going into the winter. And we already know that rates are going to increase next summer, given some capacity auctions that happened this past summer. And so it's not a huge surprise that voters are paying attention now. I'm a bit surprised voters haven't been paying attention before.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Republicans are reflecting on these losses, with some like Daniel Turner from the Future calling it a missed opportunity, to emphasize affordability. So as the reporter on the ground, how did you gather insights from GOP strategists and insiders? Did they point to specific campaign missteps, like not countering Democrats' narratives on clean energy policies?
Well, so it's interesting. In Virginia, we were tracking Virginia a little bit before the election happened. And, it was clear that candidates across the board in New Jersey were talking about electricity prices. PJM interconnection has a massive presence in New Jersey, and it does in Virginia as well. But for some reason, Republicans in Virginia weren't really talking about energy, and they weren't really talking about electricity. And that was missing from the Republican gubernatorial campaign, whereas Abigail Spanberger, she really honed in on it. And she had an entire section on her website dedicated to energy and electricity prices. If you looked at their Republican counterpart, it wasn't there. And so we wanted to chat with GOP strategists, to chat with people who are living in Virginia. Daniel Turner with Power in the Future, he lives in Virginia. And see what these Republicans think of these campaigns and the outcome there. And, like Turner said, as you mentioned, he thought it was a bit of a misstep from the Republican campaigns, that they should have been honing in on prices. Now, he had an interesting perspective in saying that, gas prices are down. They are down. Why weren't Republicans talking about this? Why weren't they pointing to the positives of the Trump administration's energy agenda at this point? There's been a lot of talk about electricity prices rising, which it's true, and they're poised to rise even further over the next year. But there have been some wins for Trump in this last year, and gas prices is one of them. So he found it to be really surprising that Republicans weren't even touching on this. Now we have the administration who has been talking about it more and more, and I suspect if gas prices continue to fall, that more Republican candidates will hone on this in the midterm elections.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Virginia, critics like Lynn Davis from the Department of Energy blame the Virginia Clean Economy Act for $5.5 billion in rate hikes over the next decade, while experts like Joel Eisen call that argument simplistic due to factors like infrastructure costs. So how did you balance these perspectives in your reporting?
Mm-hmm. Well, the nice, or maybe not nice thing, but the tough thing about covering electricity prices is that it's so complex. It's not a black and white issue. We've seen folks try to make it into a black and white argument. President Trump is one of those in terms of just blaming renewables, but then you also have folks who are saying by not allowing renewables to move forward, that's increasing prices. They're true and they're not true all at the same time. It's not just one thing. And so when you're trying to understand like electricity prices, it's important to cast a wide net to figure out exactly what things are impacting the prices. Now, of course, supply is a big one. If we're removing supply and not readily and quickly refilling that supply, it will increase prices. So if you are taking off coal or other fossil fuels and not putting in enough renewables to replace that, you could say renewables are increasing prices. However, the biggest driver behind electricity prices that folks across the board, Republican, Democrat, really agree on is transmission. And so we're not seeing a lot of infrastructure development, or we haven't seen it in the last 10 years. Now, folks have pointed out utilities have been prioritized building renewable projects. And so you could then again say, oh, because they're prioritizing green energy, they haven't been prioritizing transmission, then renewables are to blame again. However, it comes back to the transmission and what's needed. We could add so much more supply and build all of these new power plants and build this new generation. But if we don't have the transmission to transport that energy, then it's all moot. And so transmission is a big issue right now. And I think we're going to see that in the midterm elections in terms of what states, what regions are actually going to be able to hit the ground running in the next year, 2 years, if permitting reform gets done, in upgrading transmission, building new transmission, and really making sure we have the infrastructure to send this energy from point A to point B.
Interesting. And the latest BLS data shows electricity prices up 5.1% year over year through September, outpacing inflation. So with overall energy costs up 2.8%. So you've covered how this, trend started under the Trump administration. How did you track these stats over time, and what sources helped you connect the dots to broader inflation?
Yeah, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they monthly put out this data on inflation rates, on regular price rates. And so that's one thing that we're tracking every single month. And we should be getting the data for October's rate increases this week. So we should have the most recent data in just a couple of days. I'm expecting to see electricity prices rising. Whether or not they are still outpacing inflation, that has yet to be seen. But, we have a few folks in the electricity price markets, in the utility markets that we try to check in with every month to just kind of say, help me make sense of this. If we have this number, we have that number, what are we supposed to do with it? How do we make sense of it here? And you have a couple agencies like the Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. A lot of folks who are working there are in this data day in and day out. And so one thing I like to do is try to check in with folks that I know at these agencies who can kind of break things down for me when it's all I'm seeing is numbers and percentages and just need some help making those connections. And so that's where I find a huge benefit and help in my reporting.
Interesting. And Trump pledged to slash energy prices by 50% within 18 months, but prices have risen steadily. Some of your articles note that the administration is blaming renewables and fossil fuel phase-outs, while groups like the American Clean Power Association argue renewables actually keep costs lower in high, adoption states. So when investigating this debate, how did you fact-check claims from both sides? Did you consult independent analysis or review EIA data directly?
Oh, definitely. Whenever I am taking a look at data on prices in certain states or electricity price trends in general, I go directly to EIA, to the Energy Information Administration. They are an independent organization and are constantly updating their projections, their forecasts, and their tracking information. And so they themselves have said, this isn't just renewables. There's a lot of factors here. And so it's helpful to have an independent agency like that is able to provide us this data information, and they can break it down state by state, which is really helpful. So if I'm doing a story just on Virginia, they're happy to give me a new table set that's just looking at Virginia. And so I find that to be a huge benefit for my reporting. Now, of course, when we're looking at information and data from organizations like American Clean Power and others, it's important to kind of look to see what the opposite might be saying. If there's other organizations that are also bipartisan and tracking this information, are they getting similar projections? So that's what I try to do when we're looking at such a complex issue. And of course, when we have statements from the president, it's important to really track down as quickly as possible. Is what he's saying true? Is it backed up by fact? Is it this black and white? And so when he has made these claims about renewables being to blame, one thing that, again, I'll do is go to EIA and kind of get their take and their analysis on this, and then also seek out other independent researchers and experts and analysts who are covering these markets and are also doing independent tracking themselves.
Interesting. And as winter hits, one of your pieces warns of a cold snap bringing snow to the Midwest and Appalachians, potentially spiking demand. So what did meteorologists from AccuWeather tell you about how this could affect bills?
It's a complex issue, and when it comes to the winter snap that's coming, EIA has actually kind of given us some insight on this as well. And they have said folks who are powering and heating their homes with electricity, you're going to see a bit of a spike when it comes to demand. And that's just because demand for electricity is rising across the board. And so for folks who are heating their homes primarily with electricity, it's going to be about 4% increase in bills. Now, if you are heating your home with fossil fuels, with oil, natural gas, your prices are going to stay about the same or maybe even dip just a little bit. Now, that's just for this winter, and those are just projections. And so depending on how the winter storms turn out, things could change, and they are pretty flux. But if you are using electricity to power your home, the general demand rising is going to impact your bill. If you're still someone who has more a traditional gas pump to heat your home, you might be in luck for the next winter or two.
Interesting. And beyond elections, your coverage touches on projects like the Constitution Pipeline, which could save New England $11.6 billion if revived under Trump. You mentioned talks with developers like Williams Companies. How do you build trust with sources in these negotiations, and what challenges did you face verifying unconfirmed deals like the one with Governor Kathy Hochul?
It's important whenever covering these deals to have a bit of skepticism about them. You have the administration saying one thing, and you have the governor's office who isn't confirming or denying everything. But at the same time, you have to look at all of the facts. Now, of course, the deal that we're discussing is in regards to greenlighting 2 pipelines in New York that really have been put on pause the last couple of years by the state, that they've been putting off greenlighting these water permits because there's been a priority for the state of New York to decarbonize and shift more to green energy sources. And so, of course, the state hasn't wanted to support the development of new gas infrastructure. And that is a priority of the Trump administration. And so when we saw back in April and May, when the Trump administration had blocked a wind farm in New York from being built, they decided to lift that after the governor said she was willing to greenlight these pipeline projects. And so while she might be saying this isn't a deal, there was no deal, the timing is almost too coincidental. And so you have to look at all of the facts, offer some skepticism, but also offer it on the table. And so sure, we could say she didn't agree to it, but why was the stop work order for offshore wind lifted a day after, or the same day she said she would push forward these pipelines? And so when it comes to building trust with sources that are doing this, it's important to come with them with an open mind. And I think offering skepticism helps put their guard down a little bit, because we're not just going to push one person's agenda or one person's perspective, we want to share it all across the board and lay out all the facts for our readers. And that's what I try to do when I'm approaching any sources in this field or others. I want to be able to present every fact that they can give me, and let the readers kind of decide for themselves what they think of it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And internationally, Poland's push for more U.S. liquefied natural gas to cut Russian imports ties into global energy shifts. So does covering foreign policy like this change your approach compared to domestic election reporting?
It does a bit. I think there's different aspects you have to look at when it comes to it. You know, when it comes to covering LNG exports, we have to look more at the broader trade policy of the Trump administration. Whereas when you're covering elections and you're covering electricity rates in certain regions, you're not necessarily accounting for trade deals and trade policy. You know, we're seeing a massive push from the administration to increase gas exports and energy exports from the US. And of course, why not do it to Europe? We have some of our strongest allies in Europe. And especially when the European Union is trying to reduce their reliance on Russia to help end Russia's war in Ukraine, it seems like there's a great opportunity here and a great gap that the US can fill. And so there's a lot more factors to consider. They're all important factors, and you can see how they're all connected when you're looking at the push to increase fossil fuels, domestic production, and how that then plays into the trade aspect. And so it's very different issues and a lot of different sources that we'll talk about. But they all do kind of overlap when you're looking at natural gas, for example.
Yeah, makes sense. And looking ahead to the 2026 midterms, experts predict energy prices will remain a flashpoint. So from your reporting process, what signs should viewers watch for that prices might stabilize or drop? Things like Federal Emergency Regulatory Commission reforms on transmission competition or successful pipeline revivals? And how do you stay ahead of these forecasts without relying on speculation?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's tough because I think there's a lot of agreement right now in the energy industry that unfortunately electricity prices aren't going to drop, and that the president might not be able to keep his promise of slashing electricity prices and energy prices in half. And the reason for that is demand is rising so much. And as we're seeing more announcements, it feels like almost every day about a new data center or more AI build out, that's just going to add on to the demand we already have. And so as we're starting to build more generation and we're pursuing new deals, whether it's for transmission or new gas power plants or new nuclear power plants, the demand isn't going anywhere. It's just spiking over this next couple of years. And so I think the biggest thing to hope for is that these electricity price hikes and price increases will just slow a little bit. And so the things I think are important to watch out for are capacity price auctions. This is when regions like PJM and MISO will set the rate for utilities. What we can also look out for are competitive transmission deals ordered by either FERC or the region decides to do it themselves. Anything like that can help lower prices for consumers is good to watch. I also think we should be keeping an eye out for executive orders from the president. We haven't had a big one on the grid and transmission, but there's a lot of rumblings around Washington the last couple of weeks that we should be seeing either a series of executive orders focused on transmission, the grid, and lowering electricity prices, or one big one. And so we're hoping to get that by the end of the year, and that could be a big catalyst going into the 2026 midterms.
Interesting. And for families bracing for higher winter bills, what practical advice emerged from your interviews with experts? Anything on efficiency measures or policy changes we might see for the new governors?
It's a little too early to tell when it comes to the new governorships in Virginia and New Jersey. And, you know, we did have a couple experts who were saying there's not much these governors can do in the first couple of months. You know, they're still getting their feet wet. They're still trying to figure out what they can do. But unfortunately, some of the rate hikes consumers are going to see next year have already been set. They were set before this election. So there's not much they can do about the price hikes that folks might see next summer. But, you know, we are seeing more trends in large cities like Baltimore where you're seeing fun combinations of tech and energy. You know, there's one company, one organization in Baltimore that's encouraging folks who have EVs to plug them into their homes and join these pilot programs that allow them to share energy from their car with their house and essentially pump it back into the grid. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of these unique opportunities to essentially have a virtual power plant at your home. And how can we conserve our energy or even send it back into the grid, so when we do have times of emergency, like a severe winter storm, then we're all able to still share that electricity, and it's not as drastic of an impact as it might have been. So there's a lot of fun things that are happening in the space. And while we might not have many just in this moment, I think by next winter or even early next year, we'll see a lot more cities and communities wanting to engage in how can we conserve and share the energy that we're using.
Great. And I don't know if you have an answer for this last one, but finally, as a reporter embedding in this fast-moving energy beat, what was the most entertaining or unexpected moment in chasing these stories? And how does that human element help you inform readers about the real-world grind of policymaking?
You know, it's so interesting. It's a tough question to answer. But I think what's exciting is to kind of see how engaged folks are about electricity prices now. And I mean, 87% of voters from New Jersey said it was a problem. That's insane. I can't remember the last time we saw voters so passionate about an issue outside of the traditional ones like abortion or the economy or even immigration. And this is something that's impacting everyone's day-to-day life. And I think it's only going to increase. And so we're seeing more individuals speak out about concerns, whether it's due to data centers or it's due to new energy projects or even energy projects and power plants being taken off of the grid. I think we're seeing so many more personal stories come out in the past couple of months, and those are only going to increase. I'm hoping we won't see too many drastic, severe winter storms this winter, but if we do, we can absolutely expect to hear some very traumatic firsthand accounts of high electricity prices or even just the lack of electricity in general. And so it's a very exciting time to be engaged with, I think, our readers and with people across America who care about this issue, because it's something they see every day. It's on their bill. It's on their credit cards. It's on their bank statements. And so I'm loving getting to actually hear from the people outside of DC, outside of the Hill, and really hear how they're being affected.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Callie, for sharing your insights and the behind the scenes of your work. And, you know, this has really given us a clear view of how energy costs are shaping our politics and wallets. And we, of course, look forward to more of your reporting on this topic that affects all of us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for watching Deep Dive. Please visit our website for more of these investigations and feel free to send us your questions or story ideas. We hope to see you back here next week.